There it is.
Any business before the Honorable Beverly Cannoni, Justice of the Norfolk Superior Court and for the County of Norfolk. Draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard. I state the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Court is now open. You may be seated.
All right. Good morning, counsel. Good morning, Ms. Reed. Good morning,
Good morning, Judge.
I have to ask you those same 3 questions.
You don't have to ask. You know they're gonna lie.
Follow my instructions and refrain from discussing this case with anyone since we left yesterday.
No,
Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively.
They're
Are you
lying.
also able to follow the instructions and refrain from doing any independent research or investigation into this case? Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we left here yesterday? Everyone said no or shook their heads. Thank you.
oh my gosh.
Dr. Rentschler again, please.
And shout out to Officer Token, the only black female officer.
Yes, thank you.
morning.
Can't in Boston. I gotta stop saying that. She's gonna email me. Can you stop saying that? I'm gonna say that's the only chocolate in this courtroom, unless the jury looks different. I don't know.
All right, Mr. Jackson, whenever you're ready. Are you ready, Doctor?
I am, yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Rentschler, good morning.
Good morning.
Yesterday, when we last left off, we were discussing materials that you had been provided to review, and you described much of that material in furtherance of your answer that you were asked to review certain data and undertake certain testing as it relates to testing that was done by Aperture, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Did you prepare a PowerPoint presentation to illustrate the analysis and methodology in your review and testing of this case?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you bring that with you today?
I did indeed.
Your Honor, I
All
have
right.
a flash drive I'd like to have marked as next in order.
Okay. Is there an objection?
Not for identification.
Okay, so it's marked for identification.
Thank you. That'll be KK for ID.
Let me know whenever. Pardon me. Let me know whenever you're ready, Dr. Rentschler.
Sure, do you want me to bring up the PowerPoint? Or?
If you could bring up the first slide, let's start with
Sure.
that.
Let's see here. There we go.
All right, here
Is
we
this
go.
representative of the PowerPoint that you presented, or sorry, that you prepared for presentation for the jurors?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay. Are there several blank slides, just sort of placeholder slides as we walk through your analysis that the jurors will see?
There are, yes.
Okay. Let's talk about first of all, what was the purpose of your investigation? What did you seek to undertake?
So the purpose of my investigation in this matter was to evaluate the evidence, and particularly as it pertains to the alleged theory of what occurred in this case.
All right, so I'm going to strike that answer. Ask the question again.
Sure.
It's a wait. Hold on. It is. He doesn't like alleged theory. It is an alleged theory because, sorry, Brennan, Karen Reed is innocent until proven guilty. So it's an alleged theory. Don't get upset. It's the truth, according to the law. Come on, man.
Did you seek to undertake an analysis of Aperture's testing or part of their testing?
I did, yes, sir.
All right. With regard to that testing,
Nothing has been proven
what
yet.
was the reason that you undertook to analyze Aperture's testing?
Sustained.
Ultimately, were you in receipt of a PowerPoint presentation and a report from Dr. Judson Welcher?
I was, yes, sir.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to review that PowerPoint presentation in whole?
I did, yes.
Were you able to look at his report and read his report and review his report?
I was, yes, sir.
Did you undertake an analysis based on his reporting and his PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
So I want to see you both at sidebar for just a minute, please.
Already? Oh my gosh. We couldn't make it 5 minutes without a sidebar. Makes me want to change the ranges on y'all's vote. Let me know how many sidebars you think we're going to have today, because this is not a great start 5 minutes in.
May I?
Yes.
Did you undertake to review analysis and testing that was done by Aperture as reflected in the PowerPoint that you reviewed, as well as the report that you received?
I did, yes.
Did ARCA, yourself included, undertake testing based on your review of the testing by Aperture?
We did, yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me, what was the biomechanical analysis, that's the second point on your PowerPoint, what was the biomechanical analysis that was undertaken after you reviewed the Aperture reports and Aperture testing? What did you undertake to do?
So I touched on this yesterday a little bit. A biomechanical analysis, there's certain steps that you have to do to actually perform a biomechanical analysis. First of all, you have to determine what the injuries are. What are the diagnosed injuries? Second, you have to determine what happened to the individual. So in this case, what would have happened to Mr. O'Keefe? His kinematics, how would his body move? Was it contacted by anything? Was it contacted by the Lexus? If so, what forces were produced on the arm, on his body? Were they sufficient to cause the injuries that he sustained? And in this case, it's a little more involved. We have, was he hit by the car? What happened after that? Did he somehow move into the yard? And then did something happen in the yard to actually cause the skull fracture? So in order to determine if that's what actually occurred in this case, you have to look at each of those three separate events. And you have to evaluate that from a biomechanical analysis by looking at the force, looking at the kinematics, looking at a human tolerance, and determining or attempting to determine what happened. Now, if you try to determine what happened, not only do you have to prove that that was the case and the facts support that that's what occurred, you also have to eliminate all other possibilities. Because if you're saying this is how it happened, not only do you have to show that that's true.
So next question, and I'm going to strike that. Next question.
Is there an element of differential diagnosis
They don't like it.
That goes into biomechanical analysis?
There is, absolutely.
Explain that for us, please.
Let me demonstrate. So there are several peer-reviewed articles that I reference.
Is this slide number 2, by the way?
This is slide number 2.
Thank you.
Correct. This is injury reconstruction biomechanical analysis of accidental injury. And that sets forth the methodology that I just described. It's well written about, well reviewed in peer-reviewed articles. This is the method you need. If you're going to opine on biomechanics, this is the method you need to do, the steps you need to go through in order to provide an
He's about to
actual
take some major
opinion.
shots
And describe that
at
method
Aperture.
just a little bit
I can
further.
feel it.
Does that include testing?
That includes testing.
Does that include both lab testing and field testing, if it's possible?
Absolutely. Yes.
Explain that.
In fact, let me explain. Let me get through here. You know, I just had a couple examples here. This third slide, another reference about biomechanical analysis. Again, it's all throughout the literature, very well established how to do this. Now, it's all based on the scientific method, okay? And the scientific method, which you know, it was really established back in the 1620s, but this tells you how to do a proper scientific analysis. So you have an observation, you observe something. So in this case, you might say, all right, there's superficial abrasions to Mr. O'Keefe's arm, and there's a shattered taillight. Are those two things related? Well, the first thing you do is you research the topic area. You look through the literature. You find or look for any examples of that happening. You see if there's any reports or peer-reviewed articles written about this very occurrence. Can you actually demonstrate that if your arm hit the taillight would shatter and cause those abrasions?
Nope.
If this occurs or is a common occurrence, it should be in the literature. You should be able to find information about it. Then you form a hypothesis. Either you say, I think this injury is related to hitting the taillight, or it's not. Whichever one you choose, that's where you then start to go into your experimentation. You have to develop tests to get data to actually back up your hypotheses. So if I said, well, I think the injury is related to it, what would you do? You would go and you would test it. You would get an arm. In this case, we got a hybrid 3 dummy arm, and we got an exemplar vehicle, and we hit the vehicle with the arm. Or we hit the arm with the vehicle. We ran into it to determine what's going to happen when that occurs. Do we get the right circumstances, the right loading to actually occur in that case? So this, and then you go back and you analyze that. And if your results don't match up with your hypothesis, you have to reevaluate. You have to go back and see if we don't get that type of injury, if we don't get the kinematics or the force associated with what we see, you have to reevaluate if your hypothesis or what you think happened is actually true or not. So you have to continuously go through this process. And that's what experts do. That's how you perform an analysis, and that's what's important. You know, I have 3 kids. I have a 9-year-old who's actually...
So I'm going to ask you to wait for the next question.
Okay, sure.
Was there an example that you could use of sort of a real-world example that you might want to use to explain?
She shut down his
some
answer?
part of
Wow, that's crazy.
The scientific method.
There is, yeah, and I would like to explain an example of what's important with that. So I was going to say I have 3 kids, a 9-year-old who's actually turning 10 today. Happy birthday, Kai. And I have 2 older ones.
Happy birthday, Kai.
We're going to stop this. Another example.
Go ahead. Less editorializing.
Minus all the personal.
I'm sorry, Your Honors.
Go ahead.
Details matter, okay? Details in an investigation
What's
matter.
the big deal?
And details matter here. You need details. You have to explain how things happen, okay? As an expert, I can't come in and just say...
Sustain. It needs to be more question and answer.
Why do details matter?
This is amazing.
Because your opinions have to be
These
based
other experts
on
were
the facts
talking.
and the evidence.
Why is that?
Because that's what determines your conclusions. I can't come in and say, I think...
Next question.
What if you don't have all the details and facts?
If you don't have details, if
This
you
is
haven't
weird to
performed a
watch.
proper analysis, then you can't come to a conclusion that something happened. You can't depend just on your experience. You have to have the analysis, the evidence, and the details to come to a conclusion in a case.
How do you best get details to come to a conclusion in a case?
You need research. You need peer-reviewed articles. You need evidence. You perform testing. You have to demonstrate what you think happened is A, possible, and B, actually did occur.
He's allowed to use
And in order to
analogies,
do
though.
that, you need hard evidence to demonstrate that that's what actually occurred in this case.
I disagree. This is one instance where Bev is right. This is not the platform for this man to create his narrative. Bev is right. I 1000% disagree. If he's giving an analogy using his personal experience, who cares? They've asked about people. How old are they? Where did they come from? Where did they live? Where did they grow up? Are you friends with this person? And he can't go on and explain and use an analogy from his personal experience. This is weird. I don't like it, because if you're going to let one side do it, you need to let the other side do it. That's my problem.
Do you get that through both lab testing and field testing?
The form. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Can you get that in lab
I
testing?
don't like it.
Absolutely.
Can you get that in field testing?
You can get that in field testing as well, yes.
Are those integral to an analysis?
They are. If you don't have any other evidence, if you don't have research, if you don't have peer-reviewed articles showing or demonstrating what happens, you have to formulate, you have to get that evidence. And the way to do that is through field testing, if you have no other evidence and no other source of information to provide that type of evidence.
Let's go to the next slide. Did you undertake, and this is a placeholder, did
Yes.
you undertake the scientific method in this case?
I did, yes.
What was the hypothesis of the incident that you utilized in furthering your analysis?
That's
So
weird.
the first step, the first part of this event is contact between Mr. O'Keefe's arm and the vehicle.
Could you
Allegedly.
describe for the jurors what hypothesis you used based on your review of the information you got from Aperture?
Sure. So the hypothesis that I looked at, Aperture, their testing and report indicates that Mr. O'Keefe had his arm out at a 90-degree angle.
Sustained.
What do you see, by the way, where are these from, these two slides?
These two slides are from the PowerPoint presentation that Aperture provided.
All right, so you didn't create these?
I did not, no, sir.
Describe the angle of the arm in the left photograph with the drinking glass in the hand.
So the angle of that arm is approximately 90 degrees. The other photographs in the PowerPoint demonstrate that for someone the same height as Mr. O'Keefe, the arm would be at about 90 degrees with an individual standing erect. That's what was demonstrated in their PowerPoint.
Do you note anything in their PowerPoint, the Aperture PowerPoint, related to the clothing worn in that left photograph?
Yes, they have the surrogates wearing a hoodie or a sweatshirt, which is the exact same type and brand that Mr. O'Keefe was found wearing at the time of the incident.
Did that play a part in your overall analysis? The fact that
Look at this angle. Look at this angle here. That doesn't even look normal. Why is he leaning over to the side? Oh, this bothers me. This whole blue paint stupid test bothers me. Anyway, here we
the
go.
individual, the surrogate, as you use the name, was adorned with the same type of sweatshirt that was found on Mr. O'Keefe?
It did, yes. I mean, that's one of the details that we have to look at. Details matter, so we look at the clothing that was worn and the evidence found with respect to that actual sweatshirt.
I'd like to stay with that for a second. Why is that important? Why would the clothing matter?
Well, because that tells us, that gives us evidence of what may or may not have occurred. Mr. O'Keefe was wearing this sweatshirt when the time of this alleged incident occurred. So if there is contact between his sweatshirt and that rear vehicle, the taillight from the Lexus, there would likely be evidence of that. And we have to look at that sweatshirt to see the condition of that sweatshirt, if there's evidence on that sweatshirt, and be able to pair that or match that up to what happened on the vehicle.
Is that part of a normal biomechanical analysis to evaluate clothing of the body as well?
Absolutely, especially when you look at automobile pedestrian impacts.
Why?
Because clothing tells you, or can tell you, how the impact occurred, where contact occurred between an individual and the vehicle, what part of the vehicle, what part of the individual. So it either may or it may not, but it can give you very important clues about what may have occurred during the incident.
Is that part of the normal methodology that's utilized in the field of biomechanical analysis, especially as it relates to pedestrian motor vehicle incidents?
It absolutely is, yes. Look at the damage to the clothing. Look if you compare it up to the vehicle, to the ground, to other sources. It's another tool, another detail, and part of the evidence that allows you to try and determine what occurred.
Do you have experience in reviewing clothing of individuals that may have been involved in vehicle pedestrian incidents?
I do, yes.
How often has that played a part in your biomechanical analysis and the methodology that you employ?
It happens quite often when we look at automobile pedestrian impacts. That's really one of the steps that you need to do. You need to look at the clothing, you need to look at that evidence and see if that matches up with any other evidence in the case.
Would it be a proper methodology to just ignore the clothing in a vehicle pedestrian incident?
It would be, yes. I mean, it's really one of the first things you should do.
I'm sorry, my question was, would it be proper if you just wholly ignored it?
No, it would be improper. It would not be proper. It would be improper if you just ignored it.
Getting back
mad
to
she's not getting the birthday
slide
cake.
at hand, and we're on slide, just to stay coordinated, is this slide 7?
20.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. You've talked about the left photograph. What is the right, the short video?
So this short video is what I refer to as the paint transfer test that was performed by Aperture.
Blech.
And what they did was take a surrogate the same approximate height and weight as Mr. O'Keefe and had him stand behind a subject, an exemplar Lexus, the same year, make, and model. And they put paint on the rear taillight cover on the fender, and then they backed it in to the surrogate's arm. And the reason for this is they attempted to show that where the paint contacts the arm, that it's the same area where the superficial abrasions were on Mr. O'Keefe's arm.
Did you utilize these photographs and videos from the Aperture report in conducting and building the field testing and or the lab testing that you ultimately undertook?
I did, yes, sir.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What's depicted in this slide?
So this is from the Aperture report, and the third conclusion is that the location and orientation of the lacerations on John O'Keefe's right forearm and arm are consistent with the geometry and the orientation of the right taillight on the Reed 2021 Lexus LX57.
Happy
How
birthday,
did you
Kai.
interpret the phrase geometry?
To me, geometry just means shape. So the way I interpreted this is the one test that was performed with respect to the taillight. This is the only test I saw that Aperture performed involving the taillight and the arm, is that with this paint transfer test, they concluded that,
Garbage
again,
test.
the area where the paint was transferred onto the arm is consistent, the same shape and orientation as apparently the lacerations found on Mr. O'Keefe's forearm.
Did this test, in your opinion,
That's exactly what he's saying, Karen.
establish force multipliers that were exerted on the taillight?
It has nothing to do with force. It doesn't describe the force exerted on the taillight or on the arm. It doesn't describe how the arm would have moved
Exactly.
as it hit the taillight. It doesn't describe how the taillight would fracture.
Exactly.
It doesn't describe how you would actually get the lacerations on the arm. Again, all this
Exactly.
does is generally, and I made an error there. This report, and you can see the slide says laceration. Mr. O'Keefe did not have lacerations on his arm. He was
What did he have?
he was diagnosed with superficial abrasions.
Is there a difference?
Oh, man. Yo, he's cooking them. I had to shut it down. The doctor is cooking them. Shout out to Dr. Rentschler. I'm not going to freeze him like that. He said this test was useless. It wasn't useless, but there was no point in this test when it comes to the force, because as we all saw and complained about with the paint test, it's a person. It's not John O'Keefe. He's got his arm painted. And you're just backing into him at 2 miles per hour. It doesn't show the cuts. You can't show that, or the lacerations, whatever you want to say. You're not going at the same speed. It's a waste, man. And they paid him $300,000.
He was diagnosed with superficial abrasions.
Is there a
Shout out
difference
to the
between
Commonwealth.
laceration and abrasion?
There's a distinct difference, both
a big
biomechanically
difference.
and medically, yes.
Is that an
Yeah.
important distinction?
That is.
Why?
The first step of the biomechanical analysis is identify the injuries, and you have to take the diagnosed injuries identified by a medical doctor. So
Wow.
it's superficial abrasions. To put lacerations on, that's simply incorrect.
Objection with the strike.
So I strike the end of that.
Would you describe
He said it was
the
wrong.
injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm as lacerations?
No,
Would they be more properly described in another way?
it would be, yes.
What's that other way?
So they've been diagnosed as superficial abrasions. An abrasion occurs
By
when
all
there's
4
rubbing
medical
or
examiners.
scraping of
3.
the skin, and it just rubs away the top layer, the epidermis of the skin. Now, a laceration is a jagged ripping or tearing of the skin, which gets down through the epidermis into the dermis. So abrasions take much less force. They're less severe than what a laceration actually is.
In
Wow.
a biomechanical analysis, if it's done properly, is it proper to get is it important to get the proper injury to the body as a foundation to the entire analysis?
That's core to the analysis, because you're trying to determine how an injury occurred. You have to know what that injury is. You have to have the correct injury to be able to evaluate it.
Let's go to the next slide. Bless you.
And again, they're using
This is
the
a placeholder.
Commonwealth's own
I want
testing
to ask you a little
against
bit,
them.
while this is
Yikes.
up. We can turn the lights up.
That's embarrassing.
First step in the analysis. What is the first step of the analysis after you determine the injuries, the type of injury?
So in this step, after you determine the injury, what we want to do is we want to look at the physical evidence. So we have the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm, and we have the sweatshirt that he was wearing at the time. So the first step in any investigation is to determine, does the evidence from the arm match up to the evidence on the sweatshirt.
Did you undertake that analysis?
I did, yes.
Is that indicated in a slide a little bit later on in your PowerPoint?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide?
So this explains the injuries. And this is from on the left side, that is the diagnoses from the autopsy. The right side is from the hospital. And you can see it says blunt impact injuries of head and extremities, abrasions and lacerations. The laceration is on the back of the skull, on the back of the head where the occipital skull fracture is. When you look at the extremities, everywhere where it talks about the extremities, it's superficial abrasions. So the first step in a biomechanical analysis, you review the medical records, determine exactly what the injuries are. And you can see there's a picture of the actual abrasions. Those are the documented injuries or abrasions to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Are these acceptable sources? Well, let me ask you this. What are the sources that are reflected on this slide that you referred to or you relied on in coming to your opinions and conclusions regarding Mr. O'Keefe's injuries to his right arm?
Again, on the left side is from the autopsy report from the medical examiner, and then the right side is actually from the Good Samaritan hospital where Mr. O'Keefe was taken.
Are autopsy records, hospital records, medical records acceptable sources for a biomechanist to rely on in determining or coming to opinions and conclusions?
They are. They are the sources you go to determine what the injuries are. Yes.
Did you see? You reviewed the entirety of the medical records as well as the entirety of the medical examiner's file. Is that right?
I did. Yes, sir.
Did you see reference to any fractures that were noted on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his arm, his forearm, or his hand?
No, there were no diagnosed or references to fractures on any part of his right arm or hand.
I'm going to ask Mr. Wolk to display a couple of exhibits.
This is crazy.
The Xrays.
Okay.
And even after seeing ARCA's first test, if you look at how fast 24 miles an hour is hitting your arm, even if you busted the tail light, how would you only get those superficial scrapes versus actual lacerations and cuts? Because man, that moving at 24 miles an hour, you think it would almost take your arm off like it did with the good old Rescue Randy over there.
So he's going to take over the TV screen.
Sure.
If that's okay, Your Honor?
Again,
Yes.
who knows? I just want to know what happened to John. And I'm sure Peggy and Mr. O'Keefe Sr. wants to know too. It's sad, man.
This is an exhibit that was marked yesterday. I want to say 226. I may be wrong, Your Honor. I'll get the right nomenclature in just a second. This is one of the exhibits, one of three exhibits that was introduced yesterday. Do you recognize what's depicted on this?
That's the X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand taken January 31st, I believe.
Did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Oh,
Was
here's
it
the
part
X-ray of the arm.
Medical record. Medical records or these records.
It was a series of the X-rays. Yes, was attached. It was part of the medical records that were provided to me and that I reviewed in this matter.
Thank you. Just for the record, so I can clarify, this is Exhibit 229A, as an apple. Do you see? Have you looked at X-rays before?
I have, yes.
Have you interpreted X-rays in furtherance of your analyses in years past?
I have during my biomechanical analysis, yes.
Are you trained to look at X-rays and determine whether there are fractures, hairline fractures, broken bones, things of that nature?
I've been doing this for 20 years. In graduate school, I worked with surgeons and doctors to look at X-rays.
Is that part of the normal methodology that biomechanists undertake in furtherance of injury analysis?
It is part of what we normally do, yes, sir.
Would it be an important part of a biomechanist's ultimate analysis and conclusions as it relates to an injury analysis?
It would be, and especially in this case, if we're talking about impact to the arm and the hand, very important to determine, as I said, not only what the actual injuries are, but what injuries did not occur.
Would it be appropriate to come to any opinions and conclusions in an injury analysis if you were to ignore X-rays, if they existed?
No. If X-rays exist, you need to review them. You need to determine what they represent and what injuries either did or didn't occur. You absolutely need to look at them.
Do you see any injuries represented or any defects represented in this X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand?
I do not, no, sir.
Can you describe what you do see or what you would expect to see if there were injuries, broken bones, torn ligaments, things of that nature, swelling? What would you expect to see?
You could actually see the fracture lines on the bones. They are evident along the hands or along the ulna and the radius. Any dislocations you see, there would be a difference in the space at the joints between the bones. Dislocation, then there would be an increased space or even a decreased space if there's compression of the joints, the interphalangeal joints, the metacarpophalangeal joints, the wrist joint. There's no indication on these X-rays of any fractures or any trauma or any type of injury to the bones or the joints.
Can we go to 229B as in Bravo with the court's permission?
Yes.
You see what's depicted in this photograph?
I can, yes, sir.
What is this?
So this is a X-ray. The forearm shows the ulna and the radius, which are the two bones in the forearm.
Do you see any defects, injury, trauma to these bones or anything associated with those bones?
I do not. And when you're viewing this on the software to look at the X-rays, you can actually adjust the contrast. So you can adjust the brightness and the darkness, and it allows you to go through the whole range to better evaluate whether there are any fractures. This is a little bright, so when you're looking at this, you would actually decrease the contrast a little bit.
In terms of your review of this particular photograph, what did you note in terms of trauma or injuries at all?
I did not note any indication or any signs of trauma or injury to the forearm or to the wrist in this case.
If we could go to 229C as in Charlie, what are we looking at in this photograph?
This is the right humerus, the right upper bone of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Do you notice, or did you note, did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you note any defects, trauma, injuries at all with regard to the bone is the
humerus.
The humerus?
I did not, no, sir.
What about the joints associated with the humerus, top or bottom?
I did not note any injuries or damage to either the elbow or the shoulder joint either.
What is your opinion and conclusion, having reviewed all three of these X-rays, with regard to the condition of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, starting from the arm, the forearm, and the bones in the hand?
There's no indication of any type of acute injury from the X-ray to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his hand, his forearm, or his upper arm.
Thank you. We can switch that back.
Wow.
And if we can go back to your PowerPoint.
Wow, wow, wow. No, he's a biomechanist.
Can we go to the next slide, please?
So I don't know if that technically makes him a medical professional.
Maybe. Let me see if I can start back in on it here. Okay, there we go.
What are we looking at in this slide?
So again, this is the hoodie or sweatshirt that Mr. O'Keefe had on at the time of this alleged incident.
Did you consider these photographs in conducting your injury causation analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
What role did these photographs of Mr. O'Keefe's hoodie play in your injury causation analysis?
So this shows the hoodie, and it was inspected by the police department, and it was noted, as you can see on the right sleeve by the triangles, there were 9 different punctures or holes noted in the sleeve of the sweatshirt.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in these series of photos?
So let's come to sidebar for a minute and Mr. Jackson, bring your PowerPoint, please.
Well, they're going to shut it down because we're talking about the holes again, and Brennan, he knows he's about to get it. Hearing about the injuries I mean, this again, we saw the difference between the test that Aperture did and that Aka did. Major difference. We're actually seeing the speed, the damage that can be done at that type of speed, and you're going to tell me these lacerations or whatever you want to call them, these scrapes came from that happening? Y'all got to get your story together, Commonwealth. Come on, man.